realise when I say this, I'm probably not going to get a lot of sympathy, but I'm gradually discovering that it's tough getting old. I had to give up footy because of that, and I've had to start taking life seriously. I'm getting used to different aches and pains that weren't there 20 years ago, and I'm not actually feeling that much smarter than I was when I was a teenager, which is, when you're a teenager, of course, you know everything anyway. But one thing that accentuates that sense of getting old for me is this town. Having lived all my life in this district, whenever I go around town, I think it used to be different. Everything's changed, and that's so long ago that it was like that, like about 30 or 40 years. And it just serves to remind me that I'm not a kid anymore. Now last week Phil got us to raise our hands if we had seen any of the movies that he had put up. Remember, he put up a heap of movies and we were discussing the change in society, etc. So today, to follow that trend, I'm going to get you to put your hands up. So when I say, I remember going to the Port Elliot Drive-In to see Grease, you put your hand up. Who saw Grease at Port Elliot Drive-In?
I didn't see Grease, I just saw that.
Now, as I was saying, walking around town makes me feel old. So let's put some dates on this. I am so old, I went to school at Woolworths. Anyone else here go to school at Woolworths? Yeah. I actually went to school with some of your kids, so whether that makes me young or old. And there are a lot of businesses that have changed. I can remember when Stratco was called Wool Bay Line. Can anyone remember Wool Bay Line? Yeah. And I remember, hang on, I'll just get the bearings, roundabouts there, isn't it? Okay. I remember when Victor Harbour had a Ford dealership just across the road. I think it was called Kearney or Kearney Ford, and then it became Campbell Ford, yeah. It's the same people putting their hands up, you might just follow that makers here sometimes. I have vague memories of travelling from Victor Harbour to Adelaide by train. Does anyone else do that? I've got memories of going through tunnels. That's pretty vague, but I can't remember when they shut the train line down. I'm sure somebody will tell me afterwards. Is Bob Hall here today? No. Because I remember walking up the main street. You'd start at this end, you walk up, you get your car serviced by Peter Toot. You go to Ralph Croshaw for a short back and size, because that's about the only haircut he could do. You go to Rex Elliott to get your prescriptions filled and your medicines, etc. There's a shoe shop up the end on the left-hand side as you're going up. I can't remember. I was hoping Bob would remind me who that was. And then you cross the road to Bob Hall's newsagents. And then, of course, there's the servo on the end where Subway is now. So can anyone remember all that, or have I got something wrong? If I've got something wrong, tell me. A few other things have changed, so I'll list off some names that I remember. The Clifton. Who remembers Clifton? We had Seymour over the road, Wonder View on the beachfront, and Double D Greengrocers down at Harbour Traders. Yeah. And Lovell's Bakery. Went to school with Simon Lovell. Yeah. In fact, I am so old, I can remember when Jeff Sullivan came to town. And like that was last century. Yeah, mid-80s.
I am age.
I should have got him first, because I was going to say that I thought he was old then. And that he must be nearly 100 by now. So everything is old, everything is different, and it makes me feel old just thinking about it. Now, I need a security blanket sometimes, so I'll stand behind the pulpit. Now, I guess to be perfectly blunt, my life covers less than a quarter of the period of time since European settlement created this town. But while contemplating the history of Victor and the surrounding districts, it did make me think about the town's Christian heritage and who have been some of the people that have left a mark on the spiritual well-being of this community. response to this question of the people who've shaped the Christian history around here. But I'm going to make you an offer. Now, I have to admit that sometimes when I'm listening to a sermon, I'll take something the preacher says and I'll go off on my own tangent and follow that for a while, and then eventually I'll wake up and think, now where are we? So if you have been around for a while, and I'm rabbiting on, think about who the people that you think of that have had a Christian influence around here. Or if you just want to get straight, just think of who have the Christians been that have influenced your own personal journey with Christ. So back to our local history lesson, specialising in Christian heritage. The first name that came to mind was Ridgway Newland. Is that familiar to people? There's a suburb named after him, etc. He arrived in 1839 and brought 50 people with him. They settled at Yorkie, started a farm and a church which grew, shifted into Victor, grew again, they built, and now they're spending, $140,000 retiling. But that man came, he brought 50 people with him, and he started the church and started the Christian, or was at the start of the Christian heritage of this district. In today's language, you might call him a church planter because he brought his people with him and started the church. But the contribution of that group, Reverend Newland, has been long-lasting. Move forward to 1884. Has anyone heard of Sarah Upton? I knew I'd get you with at least one of these. If you walk up the main street, the only reason I know about it is I walked up the main street and there's a little plaque up near Professionals Real Estate there. She came from England as a young lady to establish the Salvation Army in the community in 1884. So she came essentially as a missionary from another land to here to establish the Christian presence and establish the Salvation Army, which has now been going here for over 25 years or more. My third choice is a man called the Reverend Charles Tresize. Have I caught you on that one too? Excellent. Now just keep in mind you can think of your own, so if you've got something else, talk to me afterwards. Now if my memory of the history is correct, in 1896, he led an outdoor service in Warland Reserve. So I gather he was something of an evangelist. Whether he lived here or was visiting, I don't know. But in that gathering was a young man, and that young man made a decision that still has influence in Victor Harbour today. His name was Elijah Hutchinson, and his children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren are still having an active influence in our churches today. Our connection with this event was, unfortunately, with his granddaughter, Christine. And for my fourth contributor, I have cheated a bit and gone to my hometown of Inland Valley in the early 1900s. And there's a man called Harry Dennis. And he was a farmer, and he was just described as a true Christian gentleman. He was remembered as a person who served his God, his church and his community. In short, he's just remembered as a servant whose example influenced the people around him. Today is Mother's Day, and as such, it's the time when we reflect thankfully about those who have helped us become who we are today. But when we look at how we have turned out in our lives, there are several different components as to how we consider that. Firstly, there's the genetic component. Now this is relatively straightforward. We get our genes from our mum and our dad. So that helps determine things like, they get it from their parents and grandparents, etc., etc. That helps things determine like our eye and hair colour, our height, whether short or tall, our intelligence, our temperament a bit, maybe even the size of our nose, and all those sorts of things. That's relatively straightforward. Then there are environmental factors on how we turn out as people. And we can credit or blame our mothers for some of this as well. The example they set us, how much they feed us, if we were loved or abused, These and many other examples of the environment we live in shape who we become. And then there's the spiritual side to our person. And here the family ties can get a bit stretched. You see, one of the unfortunate yet essential characteristics of the Christian faith is that it is not a heritable condition. I say unfortunate because, as a member of Generation X, I realise that my generation has largely moved away from the church and the faith that their parents belonged to. And I know it grieves or concerns those parents. But it is also essential, and it needs to be the individual to make their own decision to follow Christ, to be in that genuine relationship with Jesus. But we are not the first people to experience this disappointment. Earlier we had the Gospel read from the first chapter of Matthew, and it's detailing the family history of Jesus. He goes all the way back to Abraham, so he's at least got his genetics sorted. Originally I included this reading to highlight that in biblical times, mothers were really only mentioned if they had some sort of notoriety associated with them. Either good, in the case of Mary or Ruth, or whether it's a bit dubious, like Tamar or Bathsheba. But looking at it again, I realised that they had the same problems then as we do now. David was close to God. God helped him kill Goliath. God helped him become king. David was really close to God. His son Solomon was close to God, but he started to waver a bit. And then the next two generations, Rehoboam. I didn't give you that one, did I? And Abijah. So after we finished that, we finished at David, didn't we? And then there's Solomon. I'll read it again. Rehoboam and Abijah. And they went completely away from the faith of their fathers. Despite the obvious nature, you read in the Bible and you think this is so obvious what's happening to these people, and yet they walk away from it. But that's what happened. The next generation was a bloke called Asa. And he came back to God and he started rebuilding what his predecessors had walked away from. And as you go through the family history of Jesus, it was like that. People coming to you on the way to God. Until you get to Jesus and he made it all good. He became the Messiah. So just recapping. Our genetics are fixed, our environment is controlled, but our spiritual state is in the hands of God. But as touched on earlier, there are others in the past and the present who can influence our faith, influence our spirituality, by showing us an example, teaching us, and above all, encouraging each other to persist in our faith. As touched on in communion, it started with Jesus, one man talking to his disciples, 12 people and a few others. And then it spread from there, and now we are part of something that is huge. There is a saying that the child is raised by a village, or by the village. As God's children, we are raised by our God and his family, his village. It is more convoluted than having a simple family tree, but we know that he is faithful. Psalm 100 tells us that his faithfulness continues through the generations. Now, over recent weeks and months, Phil has been talking about the Christian faith, our faith, and how it needs to be communicated to this community in a way that brings the word of God to those who are the most important to the church, and that is the people outside its perimeters. While our own faith is a measure of our personal relationship with Jesus, at a community level, we can look back and we can see that it has been done before. It has been done by individuals and groups who have done what God has required them to do. It has happened before in this town, and with God's help, it can happen again. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture, and we are a part of a very big, in fact a huge, flock. Amen. As one to finish with is Cornerstone. I hope it's good. Led by a 100-year-old brother.